No, you really can't understand a house without checking out what it's built on. So, starting right at the foundation, Jesus teaches us to call God our Father. Right out of the gate, boom, the text establishes a very specific identity. We're talking about a loving parent who cares deeply, not some distant, cold ruler who's completely unaware of human struggles. The whole architecture of this prayer starts with closeness, warmth, and this really familiar family bond. But, and this is a big but, we don't stay in that cozy living room for very long because immediately we hit the phrase in heaven. This serves as a totally vital counterbalance. It reminds us that, yes, while this figure is incredibly close, he is simultaneously holy, powerful, and completely sovereign over the entire universe. So, in literally just 2 words, the scale of the architecture expands from a humble family home to, well, the absolute edge of the cosmos. Those first 2 concepts together, yeah, that is definitely not an accident. It sets up this deliberate, dramatic tension that brilliantly illustrates a massive paradox. Think about it. On one hand, you've got the loving father, super intimate, approachable, close. And on the other hand, you have a sovereign king, representing total majesty, holiness, and absolute power. According to the text, when you pray this, you are actually coming before both at the exact same time. And honestly, holding those 2 enormous, opposing concepts together is exactly what makes this foundation so structurally sound. Okay, so once that massive foundation is set in stone, the blueprint moves on to build the architectural threshold with the words, "Hallowed be thy name." We transition straight from the identity of who is being spoken to right into the very first action of the whole interaction. And that leads us to the priority of praise, or entering the threshold. See, before anyone can just casually stroll into this structure and start making a laundry list of requests, the text requires them to cross a very specific threshold, the threshold of reverence. Hallowed. It's one of those antique words we kind of just skim right past, right? But the source text defines this heavy, really precious word as meaning holy, honored, and revered. It's about setting the name apart as completely sacred. So it's not some passive adjective, it is a totally active posture. What that means is, this line isn't just polite filler before the real conversation starts. No way. First, it's an active declaration that this name deserves our absolute highest respect and praise. But crucially, and this is so cool, it is also a petition in itself. It's a prayer that this character, this reputation, and glory would be honored globally. The speaker is effectively taking their own desires and aligning them with the global honor of the one they're talking to. And this reveals a super profound structural instruction right from the source material. Notice the sequence here. Worship and honor must precede asking and requesting. Praise is a strict prerequisite to petition, meaning before asking for daily bread or forgiveness or protection, the stuff that comes later in the prayer, the speaker has to worship first. In our modern world, where we're kind of conditioned to instantly demand what we want right this second, this ancient blueprint forces a radical shift in perspective. You establish the relationship, you honor the authority, and only then do you ask.
Thy kingdom come. Now, at first glance, I know it feels like a pretty basic opening, right? It's something people have repeated for centuries, honestly, probably without giving it a second thought. But when you really stop and analyze the text, this is actually a massive, forward-looking request. It completely sets the stage for the whole shebang. It essentially forces the person praying to start their focus entirely outside of themselves, looking toward a much grander, cosmic scale before they even think about addressing their own personal needs.
What's really fascinating here is how the source material defines this kingdom. We usually think of a kingdom as a physical place, right? But it's not a spot on a map with borders, or a capital city, or a flag. Instead, it's defined as the active rule and authority of God. So, when you actually speak these words, you aren't asking to be taken away to somewhere else. You're actually asking for an active, dynamic reign to step in and take over our current reality. It's essentially an invocation for authority to shift right here, right now.
So think about it. What are you actually asking for when you say, "Thy kingdom come"? Well, the text breaks it down into 3 very specific transformations. First, you're asking for more people to come to know Christ. Second, you're asking for a global increase in righteousness, and that means a tangible, real-world increase in justice, peace, and human flourishing today. And third, you're asking for the ultimate establishment of God's future kingdom. So you see, it's not just some passive wishful thinking. It's a highly active request to completely change the world.
Ultimately, this opening line expresses a really profound longing. Look, human history is full of dissatisfaction with the current state of the world. We all feel it. And to pray, Thy kingdom come, is basically channeling that dissatisfaction into looking forward to a definitive future day. It expresses this deep desire for the day when Jesus returns to reign forever. The prayer essentially demands that we start with the absolute end goal in mind, way before we even start dealing with the present moment.
Which brings us to our next section, surrendering to God's will. Here we hit the next big petition, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Now this introduces a seriously fascinating benchmark. Instead of looking around us to figure out how to act based on what everyone else is doing, it actually sets the standard for how things should operate down here by forcing us to look upward. It completely flips the script and establishes a totally different metric for success.
And this brilliantly illustrates the absolutely vast gap between two very different realities. On one side, in heaven, as the text notes, God's will is obeyed perfectly. There's zero rebellion, no hidden agendas, just absolute clarity. But down here on earth, well, making that will a reality requires surrendering our own deep desires. It means trusting God's plans, especially when they completely clash with our own egos, our ambitions, or our carefully crafted 5-year plans. It's a forceful contrast between flawless celestial obedience and, let's be honest, incredibly difficult human surrender.
Bridging that massive gap between heaven and earth really boils down to 3 heavy demands: submission, faith, and obedience. Asking for God's will to happen on earth exactly as it does in heaven inherently means stepping aside. You're yielding to a plan that is infinitely bigger than your own personal agenda. It takes the faith to believe that this overarching plan is actually better, and of course, the obedience to actually follow through with it.
Let's move into part 4, trusting for daily needs.
Give us this day our daily bread. I want you to notice the incredible shift in scale here. It's almost like whiplash. Just a second ago, we were contemplating the grand return of Christ, the end of history, the perfect obedience of the cosmos. And now, we've zoomed all the way down to the incredibly short, immediate span of a single 24-hour period. It's an absolute masterclass in transitioning from the eternal to the immediate.
Now, in this context, bread isn't just about grabbing a loaf from the local bakery. It's a broad, highly relatable metaphor. It represents every single one of our daily needs, and it teaches us an attitude of absolute, everyday dependence. Think of it this way. Just as you can't eat one massive meal on Sunday and expect it to magically nourish you for the rest of the week, you can't rely on past provisions for today's realities.
This daily bread encompasses literally everything necessary to keep going. Yes, it absolutely includes the highly tangible things, the food on your table, your physical health, the literal roof over your head. But it also includes the invisible, essential things, the mental stamina to get through a brutal afternoon at work, the patience you need to deal with a difficult family member, or maybe the sudden wisdom required to make a really tough decision. It covers the entire spectrum of human vulnerability. But asking for these things strictly for this day begs a really crucial question. Why just today? Why not pray for a month's worth of bread so you can finally kick back and relax? Why not pray for guaranteed health, wealth, and security for the next 10 years? I mean, asking just for today goes against every natural human instinct we have to accumulate stuff and secure our future, right?
Well, the answer lies in our deeply ingrained human habits. We naturally want to worry about tomorrow. We are constantly anxious about what the future holds. We want the full warehouse, not just the daily ration. But this petition teaches a truly radical discipline, trusting God for exactly what is needed right now, today. Anxiety lives in the future, but trust lives in the present. This specific prayer forces us to drop tomorrow's anxieties and drop our anchor right here, in today's provision.
And that brings us to our final section, the posture of prayer. Here is the absolute crucial takeaway from all of this. Whether you are pondering the grand cosmic return of Christ, or striving to align your own personal ambitions with the will of heaven, or even if you're simply feeling thankful for the literal roof over your head tonight, this text demands a posture of ultimate reliance. Every single blessing, from the eternal destiny of the world all the way down to the immediate practical realities of your Tuesday afternoon, comes from Him.
We hear the words of the Lord's Prayer all the time, right? And it's so easy to just repeat them totally out of habit. But today, we're diving into this explainer to completely unpack the profound blueprint hidden right there in the second half of it. Because trust me, it's not just a sequence of sentences. It is this deliberate structural framework, a literal architecture of communion that's designed to align the human heart step by step with the divine. It fundamentally changes how we interact with the infinite.
So before we look at the specific lines, we really have to stop and ask ourselves a vital question.
Are these famous words just, a rote recitation we're supposed to memorize? Or do they form a much deeper architecture for our daily faith? It is just so easy for familiar things to lose their impact. But this is way more than a simple script. It's an incredibly powerful living pattern for approaching God every single day. It basically gives us a practical rhythm for our entire spiritual life. Okay, let's start with the cycle of forgiveness. Now, the debt we are acknowledging here, it's not financial. We're talking about the universal debt of sin. Every single person needs God's forgiveness, no exceptions. By making this specific request, we're actively acknowledging our personal failures, and we're seeking His mercy in a moment of really profound vulnerability. It's all about stripping away our pride, freely admitting that we fall short, and, honestly, finding immense relief in that pure honesty. And there's a brilliant, absolutely non-negotiable balance at play here. Think of it like a two-way street. On one side, we have receiving grace, acknowledging those failures. But you can't isolate that from the other side, which is extending grace. Jesus is basically teaching that forgiven people absolutely must become forgiving people. As we receive grace, the structural requirement of this prayer is that we turn around and show it to others. They are inextricably linked. I mean, a heart that's all closed off in bitterness simply cannot, at the same time, open itself up to receive divine grace. It just doesn't work that way. Well, after dealing with past failures, the architecture of the prayer shifts directly into the present and the future with, "And lead us not into temptation." This part focuses heavily on human weakness. It's a recognition that we just can't navigate the moral complexities of life entirely on our own. We face an exhausting amount of daily choices, don't we? And this is an open admission that we desperately need a reliable external compass. Now, hold on. It is incredibly important to clarify what this text does not mean. God does not tempt people to sin. That's a huge, huge misunderstanding. Rather, this is a humble plea for spiritual protection and wisdom. We're proactively asking God to guide us away from situations where our innate weaknesses might cause us to stumble. Think of it like asking the trail guide to steer you completely clear of the cliff edge, rather than just waiting until you slip to yell for a rope. Building directly on that request for guidance, we then ask for active protection, but deliver us from evil. The text acknowledges a pretty harsh reality here. The world is filled with severe spiritual dangers and direct evil influences. So this isn't just about avoiding a bad personal decision, This is about needing a real rescue, an impenetrable shield against forces that are far, far greater than ourselves. What we're actually doing is asking God to act as a divine fortress around our hearts and minds, protecting us from three very specific dangers: the overwhelming power of sin, direct attacks from Satan, and ultimately anything, literally anything, that would cause separation from God. It is a comprehensive plea for total spiritual protection. We're essentially securing the perimeter of our lives by entrusting it entirely to a higher power. So after these deeply personal requests for forgiveness, guidance, and protection, the architecture of the prayer dramatically shifts. It moves entirely away from our own needs and pivots straight toward ultimate divine authority and praise. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. This conclusion serves as this amazing, energizing reminder that we aren't just sending our hopes out into the empty void. Jesus is reminding believers here that God and God alone possesses ultimate authority. The kingdom is His, the power is His, the glory is His. And recognizing this specific rule of threes fills our hearts with absolute confidence because we know everything begins and ends with an eternally sovereign God. When you really stop and recognize that magnitude of power, all those personal anxieties and requests we just brought forward, they suddenly feel incredibly safe and completely well handled. Finally, we reach the concluding word, Amen. It's such a tiny phrase, right? Just 4 letters. But man, it carries massive theological weight. Amazingly, it's actually one of the very few words in human history that has survived thousands of years and crossed into nearly every language on Earth, virtually unchanged. It is the definitive seal on this entire architectural structure we've just walked through. Amen translates roughly to "so be it." It is true, or we believe it. So when we say amen at the end of this profound sequence, we aren't just signing off or, saying the end. We are actively declaring our trust that God has heard us, and we're affirming that His will is always what is best. It really is a beautiful final act of surrender. To bring this all together, this prayer demands a profound paradigm shift. It completely reorders our basic human instincts.
Think about the pattern. It teaches us to prioritize worship before we ever make our requests, submission to His will before our own personal desires, dependence before self-reliance, forgiveness before bitterness, and ultimately deep faith before we give in to fear. Guys, this is the true architecture of communion. So, now that you can clearly see this structural blueprint, how are you going to use it to transform your own relationship with the divine? It's not just about the words you say. It is entirely about the posture of your heart every single day. I want you to let these paradigm shifts truly sink in and just see how they completely change the way you trust God.
Thanks for watching.
Stay blessed and don't forget to share this video with everyone.